So what we might do... Oh, no, we haven't got John. Shall we just move to the framework, to the Aotea framework, and then we'll go back... Oh, okay, sorry, I just thought... Oh, Melanie, I'm sorry about that. Gentlemen, we'll come back to you. ETS framework. Warm welcome, Melanie. And we've just got, I think, one amendment proposed. Right, Melanie and John, over to you.
Tēnā koutou katoa, Morena. Thank you very much, Chair, committee members and independent Māori statutory members. This is an opportunity for us to very quickly run through the proposed submission that we are putting forward to the Ministry for the Environment on the emissions trading scheme. Just a little bit of background about this emissions trading scheme. It is obviously the government's principal policy mechanism for addressing New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions, and it's also the key policy measure that allows us to meet our international emission reduction targets that we've taken under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Given that it is our principal policy mechanism, it's really important for us to try and make sure that this is working most effectively and most efficiently. For us here in Auckland, it's a key component of enabling us to meet our own low carbon action plan. It represents about 33% of the emission reductions that we're trying to seek in that plan. So obviously making sure it is working most efficiently and effectively is really critical. It's also really important for us to see it working because of the benefits that come from the changes in making Auckland and New Zealand low or zero carbon. Things like reducing risk, the ability to reduce our exposure to international oil prices, and also the masses of amounts of co-benefits that come with the shifting of our economy through to green jobs, better housing, improved transport. There's a raft of reasons. And I think the final thing which is important from an economic perspective is with the growth, huge growth in international carbon markets, the ability for us as an economy to have access to that in order to have the ability to act and get low carbon initiatives running is really important. So this is the third review of the emissions trading scheme since it came into play in 2008. So it's constantly evolving, and so I think it's worth noting that the proposals that are going forward, we hope that they will obviously bed them down for longer than every 2 years, but at the moment the changes that have occurred in the last two reviews have been quite significant in weakening the ability of the emissions trading scheme to create systemic change across the New Zealand economy. So we've seen the removal of the agricultural sector from having an obligation in the emissions trading scheme, and given that that is nearly half of our greenhouse gas emissions, that's quite significant. For us in Auckland, that means that the obligation amounts to 27% of New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions with the removal of agriculture. If agriculture was in there, then it would amount to 13% for Auckland in the national greenhouse gas emissions. The other thing that has occurred is that there's a 2-for-1 surrender obligation. So now, for every tonne of carbon that's emitted, you only have to surrender half a unit. So that has undermined the drivers to change behaviour. And a further thing is that there is a price cap on the units of $25. And finally, the market has been closed, that there are only New Zealand units of carbon which come from New Zealand forestry that are accessible to the economy to enable us to drive change. So quite significant changes in response to the worldwide economic downturn. So with this review, the door's quite open for us to make comments on the design of the emissions trading scheme. So the key areas up here which we have flagged of interest to Auckland are obviously the polluter pays principle. So flagging that although the agricultural sector is not part of the review, indicating that its ongoing exclusion tilts the playing field and does not make the policy mechanism operate fairly and equitably, and that has an impact upon the economy, upon our ratepayers and householders. We've also sought to have a greater understanding of what the financial impacts will be of any proposed amendments to the emissions trading scheme on low socioeconomic communities. For us here in Auckland, I think it's really important for us to have a better handle on what that means so that we can then be in a position to possibly respond and assist. And the final general point that we've also sought in the submission is to have some consistency of approach. We're aware of at least two separate submission processes happening on the Electricity Authority and also through the RMA, and we've already identified, as it says in the submission, or potential for perverse outcomes to happen if they do not align the reviews of these different policy mechanisms. So a little bit more in detail, and I suppose the key points behind what we're proposing in the submission. We're proposing that we move to full surrender from 2017. So by that I mean for every tonne of carbon that is released, you surrender 1 unit rather than half a unit as happens now. The reason behind that, the rationale, is obviously wanting to put a correct economic signal to indicate that we do need to transition into a low or zero carbon economy, and to continue with that 2-for-1 surrender does not clearly indicate that need. The impact on households, the modelling by government has indicated that currently a household would be spending approximately an additional $20 on petrol and electricity due to the emissions trading scheme. With that surrender obligation increasing, that would amount to $40. For us here in Auckland Council, the impact for us as a business, we will have some minor cost increases that will be passed through on our electricity and gas. I think it's worth noting that we currently have electricity contracts that are locked down. We've still got 2 more years to go with that. We will be in a position when we renegotiate that to make sure that we obviously get contracts that are as cost effective as possible for the council. But marrying with that is the work that we've got with our energy management plan, which is seeking to reduce the amount of energy use that the council has anyway. And also we are aware of a number of initiatives coming out at the local board level as well, such as with Maitamata looking to put solar on the Greyland Community Centre. So there are a range of initiatives that are proactively being rolled out across council to try and reduce our energy usage. With the fossil fuels, obviously council has will have a cost impact with that. At the moment, the corporate services have estimated that at worst scenario where we have a carbon price of $50 a tonne, now at the moment we're sitting on $7 a tonne, we would look to have a 5% increase in cost on unleaded fuel, and we would look to have a 13% increase on our diesel. We've suggested that the obligation comes in 2017, and that again is to give businesses and households a chance to understand what any cost implications could be, change behaviour, maybe put in initiatives that enable them to avoid or mitigate to some degree those potential cost increases. And then the final point, which we think is really important, as I mentioned before, at the moment we only have New Zealand units available from New Zealand Forestry. There is the option to allow some international units to come back into use for businesses, and we would support that proposal because it enables businesses to make best cost decisions and how they choose to mitigate the costs of their pollution. That's it. Thank you, Chair.
Fantastic, thank you. Anything to add, John?
All good.
Okay. I'm happy to move the recommendation.
I'll
Is
second
there a
it.
seconder? Councillor Wood. Questions? Councillor Walker.
Not a question, but really just a comment. I think that submissions around this are, in the larger context, pretty futile. The New Zealand government doesn't really have any significant commitment to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This emissions trading scheme is fundamentally flawed. In fact, it's so flawed it's almost worthless. So by all means, let's put in this submission, but if we don't have greenhouse gas emissions climate change reflected in the RMA, which is our fundamental planning tool, if we don't have an effective price in carbon in New Zealand, which we don't, if we don't include agriculture, which is not only impacting on our emissions, but as far as the Auckland region is concerned and New Zealand as a whole, is directly impacting on the health of our rivers, which are in a diabolical state. Well, you know, where are we going here? So, by all means, put in a submission. I don't think it's anywhere near strong enough myself, but I don't know how much support I'd have around the council chamber around that. It was interesting to note that New Zealand got the prize at Paris on more than one occasion for its poor approach to climate change.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Yes, I think some of us would like to see some more robust statements in there, but we're also pragmatists. Councillor and I.
Just a question, with the increase of electric cars appearing on the horizon all over the place, does that have any effect on this stuff?
Through the Chair, the only effect that it would have is on those that have those vehicles. They therefore avoid the carbon cost associated with other liquid transport fuels. But there is also the bigger picture for the New Zealand economy, which is if we begin to see more of that vehicle type coming in, then we actually begin to see some transformational change in our transport sector. So I suppose there's the individual picture of the owner and then the bigger context for New Zealand with electric vehicles.
And that's why I'm questioning. So will that mean that any cost to us could be reduced, or what's going on?
So through the chair, I guess there's a connection where the ETS provides the policy signal to actually encourage more uptake of EVs. So there's the connection between those two things. Does that make sense?
Okay. Encouraging.
The essence of it is, will it make it more encouraging for that or not? And you'd have to say it would make it more encouraging as long as we retain our kind of target of 99% renewables or whatever. Now, I've got Member Ngamane next, and I just draw people's attention to the amendment proposed by the Independent Māori Statutory Board. I'm personally very happy to simply add that to the recommendation, but I seek members' support for that. So, Member Ngamane.
Yeah, just ngā mihi nui kia koutou and kia ora kōrua. Really, just briefly, we are genuinely supportive of the submission. It's just been unfortunate that we didn't have an opportunity as the IMSB to actually work on the draft earlier than perhaps we got a hold of it, by which time it was in the agenda papers. So, I mean, I think that's a signal. Were we involved, we would have recommended this. And just as a background, Māori interest in ETS has both individual impacts that we've generally covered, but there's also impacts in respect to Māori investment and involvement in the primary industries. So all we're signalling is really just the addition of that into the submission, that they need to actually look at that space when they're doing that modelling.
Yeah.
Yep, more than happy to do that.
Thank you.
Member Taipere?
No, Madam Chair, that's fine.
Councillor Filipaina and then Councillor Quacks.
Thank you, Chair. Look, the question is around your on the PowerPoint around households an additional $20 a year, which you say will go to 40. Are there any indicative figures around the increase that we could see on households and the average households? Because I recall you saying that there's going to be an increase in, one of the local boards looking at getting the community building. But are there any indicative figures?
Through the Chair, yes, there are. The Corporate Services looked at the costs that we could possibly incur with electricity, and they thought it would be a 5% increase if the carbon price went to $50 a tonne.
Right.
So 5% increase.
You also households. It's the average household, because you mentioned that, and sorry, that's really the one on our households ratepayers.
The modelling by MFE has indicated that it would double, because the surrender obligation is going from half a unit to a full unit, so it would be from $20 to $40.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Quacks.
Madam Chair, I just want to understand Member Namine's resolution up there, because is that a recommendation that the Auckland Council does more work?
No.
Not because there's the Ministry of the Environment has a quite a extensive amount of information around how the emissions trading impacts on Maori business and so forth. So on the treaty and so forth. So I'm just wondering what the intent is.
Member Ngamane?
Kia ora, no, it's not about Auckland Council. It really is directing the Ministry for the Environment, or just re-emphasising what they're all already doing, is that Council supports them continuing to look at that space in their modelling.
Yeah,
It's certainly not something that we're seeking the Council to adopt.
I'm just wondering if it's superfluous, given the amount of work that's already been done by the Ministry of the Environment on that particular issue.
Well, it's not superfluous in as much as Council's role in looking at Māori perspectives around ETS in Auckland.
Thank you. Councillor Crum. Councillor Crum?
Oh, sorry. Apologies for that. Just some clarification again on Member Namine's amendment. So how does paragraph 22, where it refers to a full understanding of the implication of changes on any sectors, communities and households is essential, is that not incorporating the general intent of what you're saying?
Yes, it does, and it generally covers when you look at Māori communities from an individual point of view. So as a person, household, or as an individual person, it does not look at the broader general, the Māori interest in the primary industry sector. That's the difference. That's the nuance.
That's clear. Okay. All questions answered. We can just perhaps deal with the amendment. Why don't we put that? And moved by Member Ngamane, seconded by Member Taipere. I'll put the amendment. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against?
No.
Councillors, do you want your votes recorded?
Yes, please.
Wax? Yep. Okay, so that's carried, and I'll put the substantive motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Thank you for that.